Hey guys, here's a quick tutorial on how I set up a map. Some of you are asking how I approach the initial setup and the concept phase. So I'm gonna just kind of narrate over a time lapse. It's about a 4 times time lapse here, and just walk you through how I'm approaching a map right now that I'm working on, which is a tower. So a lot of you have asked for like a wizard tower or something, other types of towers. You always need towers in your um, games. So I went and looked at a bunch of just artwork for fantasy towers. I looked at like Curse of Strahd castle with a couple of towers in it, just to get an idea of how others were approaching the structure of it from a gameplay perspective and then from an aesthetic perspective. So we're going to walk through creating this. I know that I want the interior of the tower to be about 12 squares, um, you know, high and long. So I'm going to approach it generally from that perspective. And right now I'm just picking my asset packs. I'm getting rid of a lot of the um, Tom Kartos stuff, other things. I may use those later, but right now I'm just basically selecting the main Forgotten Adventures packs, and then, like the Shadow packs, um, and some of the other things that you've seen me use in the past. So here I'm just going to experiment with layouts. You'll see that I'll go and rework a lot of things as I go through this. Now I'm using the spline uh, technique here where you hold down shift and you snap to grid in most cases. And what it does, it gives you a nice curve. And you can see how I set my curve. I go to the two corners of where those points are. And if you drop it in the corner, you'll get a really the curve that you're looking for. I'm going to turn off shadows because I don't like using the built-in shadows. And I've decided I'm going to change my map size by 1 square to the left and right, just so I can put this in the center. And now I'm going to go to the 700 level, and I'm going to place down floor, and I'm just going to see if I can get just the start of how I want the basic geometry of this map to look. And I've already made a mistake here. And by the way, I didn't edit out any of my mistakes. You guys will see just, where I struggle along with the rest of you to get things to work. But I think it's important to see, how I get through those situations, because you guys will inevitably run into it. I can't make my shape connect over there or it'll not work right. So you'll see me do two different shapes here. There's other ways to approach it here, which you'll see later. And now what I want to do is I want to get that floor material to match the wall. So you're seeing me eyeball it as I'm dragging it around. I went to like more of the yellow color because it looks like there's a little bit of yellowish hue to this wall. So I'm going to start in kind of the yellowish area and see if I can match them. And this is looking pretty good now. So I grab that hex code and I just make sure that I cut and paste that into other floors or walls of the same type. So that the wall has a specific hex color and the floor does, just to get them both to match up together. And you can see when they're combined, it makes for a good um, uh, finished sort of wall masonry. And that's why I combine the two. Now I realize that I need to have a door, and that's not going to be easy to do unless I set my walls and floors in a way that lets me create a door. So I deleted my wall and I used my same hex code to redraw the wall, but this time I'm doing it so that there's the possibility for a gap here at the bottom of the map. And this is me actually making 4 distinct walls, so I'm not connecting them all. I'm letting them all be disconnected in case I have to separate them later. So here you can see me separating the wall, making an opening down below. There is a tool that allows you to do this, but you lose some control and it can go a little wonky on you. So you'll see me just purposefully make gaps in my walls, especially because I'm not going to put an actual Dungeondraft asset, like portal asset in here. I'm going to make my own door. So I left that open. Now I'm just deleting points because I want to reset the geometry of the shape as well, so that it's also making an opening for that door. I'm going to recreate this side of the outside wall. It's really important that you try to get in the corners of that spline. If you miss it, your wall will look off. And in fact, there's a wall that's off here that I'm going to fix in a second. I don't know if you can notice it, but it's that inner wall up to the top right. For right now, I'm going to experiment with something I haven't done before. I want to lay out, this is new with the Forgotten Adventures latest release. It's gives you the ability to lay down stairs as a path. And so I'm getting a feel for how this path really works. And you can see I'm trying different sizes. I've currently got it on snap to grid. And the same spline technique works with path tools. You just hold down shift and you can draw it out and make a much better curve than you could if you just tried to eyeball it. So here I am experimenting with that. You can see the stairs will, if you get the right curve, the stairs will also align properly. But I don't like the look of this. This just looks really messy. So now I'm going to try, because I feel like this staircase is going to be going up, so it's probably going to be surrounded by wall anyway. So I'm going to see if I can set an inner wall and make it so that the staircase just looks better. You can see that inner wall is not looking great either. And this is all just the experimentation process. And all we're working on in this video today is just the general approach, because once I get this structure and the basic shape down, then I can replicate this on other levels. And this tower can be used in lots of different scenarios. You'll see me create versions of this tower levels that are, make it a wizard's tower, or they make it a tower that you would find in, Strahd's Keep, or just a tower that you would find in, in the city. So, but again, now that I've sort of mapped out the dimensions of it, and I'm using custom hex codes, I can turn this tower into a dark tower. I can turn it into a red mage tower. There's a lot that I can do with it once I have the basic structure established. But here I'm still experimenting with the staircases. And I'm not liking it. And you can see I'm really trying to do this snapped to grid. But as you're getting a feel for it, you realize how much I'm fighting Dungeondraft to make it do what I want. And so I'm going to end up approaching this where I just turn off snap to grid and I just eyeball essentially where I want the staircase to land. And it's just taking me a while to figure out that I have to do it that way. But this is one of those scenarios where, once you learn how to do it once, this is a technique that you can use forever after. So this is just really helping me learn what the tool is capable of and what it's not good at, and how I can, hack it to essentially make the maps that I want. And here's where I finally figure out, if I just turn snap to grid off and I just eyeball right in the middle of that circle and I build my splines off of that, because I set that inner wall, it really does cover a lot of the issues. And here I've got a nice staircase now going around the corner. I mentioned that wall that I wanted to fix. Oh, here's where I'm using the empty portal tool to make a gap there. Now I can go cover up that last little piece later, because I find it really annoying. I won't do that in this video, but that's one of those artifacts that you can clean up afterwards by just laying a piece of floor on top of it that's the same as the floor underneath it. And here's where I'm really figuring out the outside of that wall. And I'm doing edit points on the floor just to make sure everything lines up. And now I'm going to go back and fix this wall. You'll notice that its spline was off. I had committed its curve not in the right spot. So there, that cleans that up. And then because I can't help myself, I need to just make it uniform with the rest of the map. So I'm gonna fix those pieces as well. And again, this is structural work, so you want to be precise here because any mistakes you make now are going to be replicated in all the other floors and everything else. So this is feeling like a pretty good start to my tower. But I realized that's not enough space in the middle. As I was designing it, I wasn't accounting for wall thickness. And now I really don't have the 12 squares I was going for on the interior. So I'm going to go now and actually redo what I just did. And so you're watching me recreate my whole process. But now that I've done it once, I've got a lot of the basics established. So it's not too difficult to redo this. And by the way, this whole effort of just building this initial part of the keep, this took about 40 minutes. You're looking at it more in time lapse. But that's just part of making these maps. It's pretty time consuming. But the result is, you get what you want. I'm going to grab that same wall and I'm going to reapproach. So you notice I'm going 1.5 squares out from the last wall. When you actually start moving tokens through this map, especially if you're doing it on a virtual tabletop, it's not a lot of space. So I'm giving it a little bit extra space. I don't imagine a lot of players will be moving their tokens through this whole staircase. I think it's going to be more like a teleport. If you hit the staircase, you go to the next level. But I do want it to generally have enough space for a token if you did want to fit one through there. And you can see how much cleaner this came. And you did notice also that I used the spline technique on the inner wall. Here I'm changing the floor pattern so that it extends out. You may see, I may make changes to this later. You may see me pick a different floor. You'll see that I'm also picking certain colors for these floors. And now I'm doing shadows, and you might think it's premature to do that, but I actually, since I'm working on structure, I like to see the depth of the spaces that I'm working with. And so I'm playing around with, in this case, growing and shrinking the shadow because it's an interior wall. And I'm at the 50, the medium 50, I think is the one I'm working with. And now I've said I want to fade to start and then shrink at the end. So you see it's a little bit more faded in at the beginning. And I just laid it down twice. And this gives me a good feeling of depth now for the space. So it helps me start to visualize how is this space going to take shape. Now in other maps in the future, with this map or with other levels, I won't do this spiral staircase around the whole thing. I'll want to use more of the interior for battle space and things like that. So I'll use different types of stairs, just straight vertical stairs that go up. Here I'm also laying down paths. You may think it's not necessary to lay down the interior path, but again, anytime you have two material objects meeting, you need to, they'll collect the light around them. So it's important to make sure that you lay down your shadows on both sides. Even though that interior shadow is really small, it still helps your players to see that it's a differentiated height. And now instead of using a built-in door, I'm going to use a wall. And in this case, Forgotten Adventures has a nice metallic wall that I think looks like a security door. But not quite enough like a security door, so I'm trying to figure out how to make it look more reinforced. So I'm going to use the metal objects at level 100, and I'm just going to make it look like there's some reinforcements on that door. There's a stair set that I use quite a bit to make custom things, and I'm using that right here. I'm just using a metal stair. And then there's something really cool in the latest Forgotten Adventures release, and that's something called the Wibbly-Wobbly line. And because this is one of my first times using it, I don't know how to find it. So you're seeing me look all over for this Wibbly-Wobbly line. It's so small that you can't see it in the thumbnails on the left. But what I think at least when this loaded, it ended up loading at the very bottom here. But the reason the Wibbly-Wobbly line is important is you see these dark lines around the assets and these walls. They help make it look finished. The Wibbly-Wobbly line is a line that will finish it, but it's not perfect. It's got built-in imperfections. And because it has built-in imperfections, it makes it look more natural. And so if you're making custom stuff like I'm doing here, that Wibbly-Wobbly line is a great, great new addition to help make that look like an asset that, came with your asset pack versus one that you just made on the fly. You lay down some shadows and all of a sudden that door is looking like a really solid security door. Okay, so now I'm feeling pretty good about the basic geometry of the space. So now I want to add a little artistic nuance to it. And this may be something I change later. It may be something I make is a difference between different motifs that I might do with the tower. But I'm thinking of like the Tower of Orthanc from Lord of the Rings. I'm thinking of some of these fantasy towers that have these, I don't know if you call them crenellations or buttresses, but it's more than just like the round, sort of typical round tower. I want to give this some kind of ornamentation. And so I'm experimenting with dragging out my my walls to see if I can build an ornamentation that feels right. I did save, before I started this process, I saved this as a new version in case I don't like it. I can just go back to before I started this big experiment and I can just get back to my original design. But this is important to show you how I approach bringing a little bit more art and design into these that's maybe not obvious right out of the gate. And so this is already feeling like a pretty interesting design. And now what I'm doing is I'm pulling out my shadow tool and I'm just going to see if I can come up with something to make this look like more of an architected masonry sort of piece, maybe give it some depth. And so here I'm already kind of landing on a concept where these crenellations can look like they're sort of coming up from the ground. I'm using shrink and grow in a very wide shadow, and that's just because I want the shape of the shadow to achieve a certain thing, but it's causing this weird artifact in the bottom of it. You can see it there where it's all like, I don't know, pixelated or something. So I'm going to try to figure out if I can hide that or minimize that later. But I'm generally liking kind of how it's working here. And then what I realize is I really want to maintain this kind of idea of a thick wall at the top, and then it sort of has this growing base under it. So now I've used the fade in and fade out shadow path at a much lower level. And now that does achieve for me a bit of separation between sort of the level I'm at now and then whatever the base of this is. And now I'm just experimenting with, maybe I want to put an object over that artifact. Not really sure. These are just different objects that I've used from Forgotten Adventures in the past. Trying to see if there's anything stone. I go back to the trusty Stair assets to see if I can find something that might cover it up. And of course they're different colors, so I'm just not crazy about it. So where I land is, well, let's just move it back. Let's move it back into that line a bit more. And maybe there's some things I'll do later to cover it or mask it. But if I just tuck it back there, it's very unlikely that most players will ever see it, or that anyone will really ever see it. By the time I end up adding all the rest of the detail to the map, the rest of the shadows and shading, this will be something that just really doesn't come up much. Now, you may see this base replicated in the other levels. Even if I'm at level 3 or 4 or 16 of this tower, I'll probably still see this base. So it's important to me that this base looks right, because it'll maintain through the rest of the towers. But I'm feeling pretty good. And by the way, if this ends up being part of a castle, you'll see me take this whole base and make it optional, so that if I want to use this tower as part of a castle scene, I may change the overall coloring of it, get rid of this base, and then you'll see just the towers kind of follow up. You'll see I also use some more shadows here on the edges just to really create a separation from that kind of crenellation. And now I'm just showing you how I can change the color pigment of that inner map. And even though I went with what was essentially the original color, I still made it slightly different. And that way I can go back and change that in the color file later. And now I've got a large shadow path that I'm using. And this is just to create a shadow around the entire object. You can see it still looks flat against the ground. So this last shadow just creates that final separation and really makes the tower base look like it's standing and it's got real dimension and gravity to it. And so this feels like a really, really good starting point for how I want this to work. And so that's it. Hopefully you guys liked this. Hopefully this helps you as you're approaching your own start, and you can start from scratch and come up with something that's pretty compelling. So looking forward to doing more levels of this tower, looking forward to this coming out. Would love some feedback from you guys if there's anything levels wise or motif wise that you think I should put into here. But that's it. Hope you had a good time, and good luck with your map making.